Let's move on to Serie A now, where there's been a development there at the very top of Serie A. And who expected Napoli going into the international break? It should be at the top of Serie A. Who expected that? Did you expect it, David?
Absolutely not, especially when after the first game in charge in Serie A, you go, Napoli finishing 10th last season isn't a coincidence. Whoever thinks it was just bad luck is far from reality.
How bad were they in that first game at Verona as well? You know, it was like such a low point, and all of a sudden they just put it all together in the next game against Bologna, the Diego Armando Maradona. Then the second home game, they get something else from it because, of course, they're 1-0 down to Parma going into stoppage time, and Lukaku comes on and saves them. And when we were talking before about, you know, maybe creating a feeling and that maybe obscuring the detail, you could say that about Antonio Conte. That's what he tends to do when he arrives at a club. Having said that, if we are going to look into the detail a little bit, you look at the game last weekend where they win 3-1 against Como, Cesc Fabregas, Como, promoted side. I underline a promoted side. Napoli at home, Napoli have 40% possession and win the game. Now, when... I was going to say don't do that face at me, but please do that face at me. It's fine, it's fine. I just think like the fact that you have this feeling already with possession being not that important, with Lukaku, who didn't have a pre-season really, by the way, looking like pretty close to best Lukaku, which, as we know, Antonio Conte can bring out of him, that it's happened so quickly. That is the surprise, no?
It is. I think that's the surprise. I think it's the, you know, various little cogs that have come together. There was obviously a key moment, I think, against Juventus where Conte did revert back to 4 at the back, which has been important in the subsequent games. I think we've kind of become to know Conte for this swashbuckling, all-action 3 at the back system. But you got to remember when he came through at Bari, it was a 4-2-4 system, really, wasn't it, Andy? And
he's not wedded to a system.
Yeah, but I think people think he is. I think that's
they do.
Yeah, because they've seen him in the Premier League.
Isn't it?
They've seen him in the Premier League, and I think that's obviously a lot of people's views are obviously shaped on what you see right before your very eyes, and they saw that there, and they were kind of like, "This guy is so stubborn; he will not change." It is through change that Napoli have found themselves in this position, and it's not just Conte is changing as well. There's some players who are kind of changing their roles as well.
Well, one particular player who perhaps has been instrumental might be this fella.
Napoli ha segnato per la prima volta il nuovo maglia azzurra con il numero 8.
Sorry, I can't stop laughing.
That's
By the
brilliant.
way, when I say one particular player, I didn't mean the announcer, but I meant McTominay.
Have a little nod to Decibel Bellini there.
Well, why not?
Yeah.
But how instrumental has he been? If we're talking about a Conte team, a typical Conte team, which this Napoli team is looking like now, how did he manage to fit in so perfectly into it?
Forget Kvaradona, it's now McTominay. You know, he is the man who is central to all this at the moment for Napoli, and in many ways the prototype, quintessential Conte player. And judging by his, his covering stats, his distance covering stats, then he is delivering for Conte at that level. I think it's 3 games in a row now. He's had the highest number of distance covered in the Napoli team. I think he leads Serie A in terms of distance covered as well. So his influence has been quite impressive, and the roles that him and the understanding between him and Lukaku is a really interesting one. It's the most unlikely combo that you could ever think of. Lukaku was being kind of dropping deep into this deep lying forward, almost attacking midfielder type role, just off the front line. And McTominay is the one kind of playing, situated wide left, but then moving up into centre forward almost roles. And I mean, we have seen McTominay in the Premier League and for Scotland as this brilliant box-crashing midfielder with the ability to get important goals, to get goals in general as well. And Conte has kind of harnessed that, and that's why we're seeing him thrive and really energised by this role.
I mean, I think the link between those two, you're right, is super important, but I think because of how Lukaku looks physically, he's stereotyped into a player that he's not. So, you look at him as the hold-up guy. He definitely isn't, is he? He likes the ball in front of him when he's trying to score. But we've seen how he's been used in different ways by Conte before at Inter and by Roberto Martinez for Belgium. He can occupy the wide spaces. Yeah. He can drop. And it is all about creating that space for McTominay to run into. The other thing in terms of that midfield, and we have to say, you're absolutely right, Don, to bring up McTominay, to bring up Lukaku. But really, there have not been wholesale changes to this squad.
That's interesting.
That's where we feel the influence of Conte, isn't it? And I have to say, I think one of the key players so far in allowing McTominay to just go when he wants to is Stanislav Lobotka, who he could have gone in the summer because it was clear that there was going to be like a little bit of turnover. And Conte said straight away, and when he makes his mind up on a player positively or negatively, that is it made up. And he said to Lobotka, you're not going anywhere. You're really important to me. And actually, Fabregas pointed him out after the Como game and said, look, he's one of the best midfield players in this division. He's brilliant.
He's absurdly good. I think he's one of the most underrated players in Europe and has been for some time. I remember when he first came to Spain with Celta Vigo, he was just magic to watch. Just part of some really nice Celta Vigo sides at the time, and he wasn't that mobile. But my word, his vision and understanding of the game, this little Slovak Xavi type character who'll just spin passes about, bring other people into play, control games effortlessly, kind of cigar and slippers type player, I always like to call them. And he is really loving that type of role because he's got other people around him doing a lot of legwork as well.
Do we have to reassess what we mean by a Conte team then? Because, of course, he left the Premier League blaming players that weren't his players, as it were. Now we're talking about a team that is not... The players, the majority of them, as you've said, Andy, are not his players, although he's brought a couple in here and there that have worked perfectly. But it shows that a Conte team isn't necessarily a Conte team that he has chosen, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it shows that, because I think they are authentically a Conte team already, but I think we tend to think of a coach's team about a shape or a particular way of playing. And in a way, I suppose the stats sort of semi-back that up. On the other hand, I think as they're quite unlikely players to be carrying this out, with Conte, it is, from the beginning, it's all about attitude and it's all about discipline. That's the most important thing. You remember that famous speech that he gave when he first arrived in the dressing room to take over Juventus. They finished 7th the season before, so he didn't have European football, and so he had time on the training field with the players, much like he's got with Napoli this season. That you had to try pretty hard not to qualify for Europe in Serie A last season, but they successfully managed to do that, and maybe that actually helps Conte in this situation. But he gave that famous speech that we talked about before, where he said to the Juventus players, "Aren't you tired of being so shit?" And I just wonder, it's not a leap to think he would have said a similar thing to the Napoli players after what happened last season, because you can talk about all the coaches they went through, and Rudy Garcia, even though he was like lampooned and stuff, he did have a bit of unfortunate luck in the fact that Kvaratskhelia didn't have a full pre-season and kind of like limped through the first half of last season, really. Kvaratskhelia looks amazing again. And obviously he's working towards a new contract and feels a little bit more settled. I think you can see that as well.
Because he was, there was all this thing, is he going to PSG and all of that?
Yeah, exactly.
That's over now, is it? He's settled.
I don't know if it's completely over. There might be a PSG sympathetic clause in his new contract.
Because his agent was urging for that, wasn't he? He was pushing for that.
but the relations between his agent and the board, who wouldn't speak to him at this time last year because they were like, well, he's in a long contract, why would we give him more money? So he doesn't kick off, so he focuses, so he's happy, all those sort of things. But I think you look at that, and even with all those setbacks and difficulties last season, there's no way that Napoli should have finished 10th. Even if you look at all the problems that are in their way, it shouldn't have happened. And there's no way that Conte won't have drilled down into that and sort of prodded at their pride a little bit.
Look, this is a question that we'll repeat to Nikki Bandini when she's in, but I'll ask you first of all, David, can they keep it uppy for the entire season?
No.
Thank you. Anything more to add, or should we leave it at that?
I just think there's going to be an element of burnout there. I think Andy made a great point, and like I say, Conte teams are very much based on a feeling and an emotion. I just think it runs out at a certain point, and that's when we see a slight drop off. They won't finish as low as 10th. Like, look, I think they'll get Europe and what have you, but no, they are not winning the league.
Do you want to keep your own counsel till Nicky's here?
No, I would. I don't know if I'm talking myself into it. I really want them to be a title contender. If there's a situation in which they could be a title contender, it's modern Serie A. Because people like it for a reason these days. It's a really open league. So I think because of the recent years of Serie A, and there's, it's kind of like the NBA. You're not going to win it 3 years in a row. So yeah, I would love to believe they could keep it up.
It's Inter or Juve, nowhere else.
Okay, well, we might return to that one, mate.
You'll be playing that clip like you just pressed a little button for the McTominay noise in the future episode.
Indeed.